You want to get started? Waiting for more people.
Probably get started.
Andy's there. Okay, cool.
Laura said she might be able to join later.
Okay, cool.
Looks dark. Look, I don't have anything. My light.
Amir, can you remind me what you were going to discuss? Share with us.
I've been working on this crappy auto build thing, and I've enjoyed it so far. I was gonna show that, and I was also going to kind of give a couple of like parts of my talk at the Ruby Dev Summit that I gave about RubyMotion and all the stuff, and just wanted to get your ideas on it. But and then like some updates, I guess, as far as like State of the Union on Ruby. I was thinking maybe like 10 minutes each thing. So if that's too much, I can even drop it down to 5 minutes a thing. But that was really it.
No, don't feel like you don't feel like.
No, I mean, I can dig in as deep as needed, but
sure. Yeah, sounds good. I was just going to share some stuff I've been working on building a cross-platform RubyMotion gem. Might be some interesting things to learn from that process. Otherwise, I'll just be showing off what I've been working on.
That's cool too.
What's the deal with Ruby Momo?
What? What's that?
Welcome, Tristan.
Is someone trolling us? What happened? Yeah, who's this RubyMotion person? Wait. Oh, we got Tristan, RubyMotion, Dan. Okay, I guess you're RubyMotion, huh?
Yeah, I'm RubyMotion Meetup.
It's my friend Tristan. I've worked with him on some projects, so he knows what's up. He's never been to a meetup though.
Welcome. Want me to get started? I can show stuff, I guess.
Sure.
All right, let's do this. I'm trying to think of, yeah, I'll show it on my other screen. Riveting, I tell you. All right, there we go. Is that horribly small? Probably good there, right?
That's good.
Okay. So this gist, I have a public gist that you can kind of bring down, and it's a really simple concept. So this is again, quote unquote Ruby auto building, and I kind of want to show you. All right, so if I go to, let's say, go to one of my things that I work on a lot, and I type in ruby autobuild.rb like that, and then if I touch a file, it will basically kill the simulator and reload it, right? So it's not, I didn't call it live reload because it isn't live reload, it is auto building. But so let's say if I go to my ship mini world, right? I touch the file, it detects the change and it reloads it. But I do have this thing called REPL.rb. So if I go to a file called REPL.rb, and I go and I type in REPL here, it puts me in REPL mode, and then I can type in things into the REPL. So MM means start the game. All right, and so I'm on this map and I want to move east. So I'm gonna type in E, which is my east. So see, he moves east, and then I want to do 5.times move north. There we go. I moved north 5 times, and I've got this yet other file where I can just kind of mess around. So I can do class hello, write the class. Actually, it will actually set up the class inside of. It should be setting up the class inside of the REPL. So I should be able to do now. Def say hello. Hello. Okay. So then if I go here and type in hello.new. Say hello. Save that. You can see that it's actually printing it out. So it's not like a live reload of any type, but it does give you some really, really good feedback loops. And the premise, I have this whole spiel on why I don't like live reload that I can give, but let me show you just how this auto build works. And again, it's all it uses is something called PTY. Has anyone used that?
No.
Okay, so so there's a package called PTY, and what PTY does is that it intercepts. It basically lets you spun out a process, intercept its standard in, and intercept its standard out. So all I'm doing is basically looking for. I'm running a rake command. In this case, but there's my rake command, so I can do rake device, whichever. And I'm using PTY in conjunction with rerun to basically capture changes and then redirect input and output to the REPL. And that's really it. Like it's just really really fine tuned to handle that kind of feedback. Let me just put it the new version of that in there. So basically, you copy this file, put it inside of any RubyMotion project at the app level, and then or this as a sibling to the app folder, and then just do the Ruby space auto-build, and then anytime you touch a file, it will run a specific rake command. Now, so that's really it for the live reload. What's important about it is I'm eventually going to add the ability to start up multiple simulators. So what's going to happen is that you'll be able to spawn off, let's say like 4 simulators: the iPhone 6, 6 Plus, or iPhone 5S, 6, 6 Plus, and 10. Right. So those 4 devices spun up on different ports, and basically all the inputs from PTY will be synchronized. So it will just accept a single import and then or input through standard in, and then relay that out to all the REPL outputs, and then you'll get feedback from each one of the REPL outputs. And it's just this really simple concept of just using PTY, but that's kind of how I'm gonna approach these multi-REPL environments, because you'll want to be able to test on any number of devices, especially if any kind of like multiplayer. I build multiplayer games, of course. So if you have a multiplayer game and you need to do any kind of like multiplayer connectivity across 2 devices, there'll be a way to exercise that. So that's live reload, or not live reload, auto build. That's auto build with REPL PTY functionality. Thoughts on this? Questions, concerns, comments?
Tell us why you don't like live reload.
That is a great question. Okay, so
Actually, let me say, I looked at Lori's course and I noticed every time I was watching it, it had that little message at the bottom. It says, to turn on live reload, do this. And she never mentioned it during the course. I'm going, you should. What does that say down there? You know, and I saw it in the red potion thing, and I didn't. I thought, well, nobody wants to use it. What's wrong with that thing?
So so there's a couple of things. So there are technical challenges with live reload. Specifically with the Objective-C runtime, there is no such thing as live reloading in Objective-C in the Objective-C runtime. You are basically method swizzling. You're kind of hot patching, and it's not what you would expect from something that has a live reload of a runtime. Now, the reason React Native can do live reload, and I said live reload in quotes because I totally kicked out a cord. Hold on. Oh my gosh. Okay, I can deal with that. That's fine. And the reason why I call it live reload is what it's doing is React Native runs in the JavaScript runtime, and then there's a bridge to the Objective-C runtime. So when you live reload a React Native app, you're not live reloading the Objective-C runtime. It is killing the JavaScript runtime and reloading that. So the premise here is that if you have a control that you created that has a Objective-C bridge to React Native, the public methods that you expose through that Objective-C bridge cannot be live reloaded. You have to recompile for that to happen. So aside from the technical stuff, my main concern with live reload is sustainability. So let's take a page. Like the first page you're on, it's a login page. It's fantastic to be able to do live reload on that, right? You render your controls, you see them pop up, and it looks fantastic. So now the next page, maybe you hit login, you're onto your like setup profile page. Okay, so you've done the live reload on your login page. You've clicked the login button, and now you're on the profile page, and you're trying to do that live reload process for the profile page. Now, let's say you make you shut down for the day. You start back up the next day. The problem is that you want to go to your profile page. Well, how do you get there? I guess you have to manually type in and log in before you can get to your profile page to start your live reload process. Okay, so you do your live reload there. You shut down for the next day. Now you're on your messages page, which is only accessible after you go through your profile page. So now the next day you go log in, set up your profile, then go to your message page where you do your live reload. The point is that the deeper you go down the stack, the harder it is to leverage live reload until that point. And so when I talk about sustainability, what I built into, let me share my screen one more time. With regards to sustainability, the reason I push so heavily on that is RubyMotion has this class called top level. It is what is in scope when you start up your REPL. And what I do is I include a module in there called REPL automation. I'm sorry, do you hear me?
Yeah,
is there a question?
No, there was a pause in my video.
Okay, so with regards to sustainability, what you really, really, really want to push for is having some form of almost UI automation built into your application. So top level includes a module called REPL automation, and REPL automation exposes the bits that are needed to kind of automate my UI. And this is the path to sustainability that you want to shoot for, where live reload just puts you in a position where you have that fast feedback loop, but it's not sustainable. The fast feedback isn't sustainable after a certain point. And this is speaking from personal experience with using React at Match. So I was doing React web development. We had the live reload. It was fantastic. And then we got to really complex scenarios that required us to set up data on the server and all this other ancillary stuff around just live reloading the HTML page. And once you get to that point, you need to do things. We basically used a variant of Capybara. I mean, it was F# based because it was kind of like a .NET project. But the premise is that we used Selenium for the UI automation. We had some Node packages to handle insertion into the database and setting up a server environment and all that stuff. And then we were able to get to the page we really needed to work on to do the UI design that we needed to do. So that's something that you generally want to think about with regards to a feedback loop, is that it's just not sustainable if you just think about that immediate page and viewing. You have to keep into consideration that you're adding with every new screen, you're adding a barrier that you have to manually enter information to get to that next screen. So anyways, that's my spiel on live reload. Not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it's short-sighted, and I want to think a little bit further than that.
Have we looked at? I like looking at what other people do.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching Miguel de Casa the other day from Xamarin.
Yeah.
And they're doing something with, as he said in his, it was kind of like Miguel. He's funny, but
the QR code thing is
you make a change on your code and it automatically compiles, and then he says we don't have to save it. And I loved his thing. He says, "What are we, animals? You know, like we have to save? No, we don't have to save. We just type it and just compiling." And I think there's some platforms who do a lot of that. They compile on the fly.
Yeah.
And it goes to the device. I think it's only for a device. You can't do it in the simulator.
Yeah, and the thing, what's happening there, the magic behind the scenes is basically they're doing JIT like right on the device. So they basically an intermediate representation is being sent to the device, and then it's getting JITted on the device.
Okay.
So there is an immense amount of work with regards to cleanup around that. So like it can be done. I'm not saying it can't be done. What I'm saying is that once you've done the same compilation of the class over and over again, added methods, added functions, you're JITting, right? You're method swizzling. You're doing all those terrifying things of the Objective-C runtime without recycling it. So there's just an immense amount of garbage collection that's not GC that has to happen, and there is a breaking point. I promise you on that.
Okay.
And that's my biggest thing, is that I'm being upfront. I'm saying that it's technically challenging for these reasons, and there's some really, really great tech demos, but there is a breaking point, and you'll hit it, and then you'll be really frustrated when that happens. And there's some variants I was thinking about bringing eval back and kind of almost getting you there, but there's still some places where, like class methods, you won't be able to live reload class methods and variants of that. So it's something that I'm pushing to get right. But it's one of those things that I'm in the weeds with y'all. You know, if I can't use it myself, it really doesn't make sense to market it in such a way that says, oh, it's the bee's knees, or, you know, the best thing since sliced bread, when it doesn't hold up to production usage.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm kind of pushing for, you know, live reload is a thing. It is very difficult and it's very hard with Objective-C, especially the inner workings of it. Auto build with some kind of automation feedback loop is more sustainable because of that reason. And it's just because the Objective-C runtime wasn't designed to do this kind of stuff, right? It just wasn't.
That looks good so far.
Yeah, so I mean, the idea there, again, it feels more MacGyverish. I'm saying, like, I'm using PTI, I'm redirecting things to standard in. I'm using this concept of a top level and some global variables to hook into those components that I want feedback on, and then I'm building that sustainable automation suite as a API within, like a headless API within my application. And that's been the most sustainable thing that I've been able to do so far. But I don't stop, right? I will continue to go until I find something better, and I will drill in. But for right now, that feels that's going to be the best thing.
The I did see a Swift project where what they were doing is they were actually compiling the UI at runtime.
Yes, so they're
which gives you a live reload, but it also has a downside in that then you're compiling your UI at runtime.
Yes.
You know, and if it's something simple and you're okay, well, then you probably don't need a whole lot of the live reload anyways. And if it's not simple, the compiling it at runtime is just going to end up shooting you in the foot when you try to push it out there.
Yeah. And believe me, I'm not going for like tech demo marketing stuff. I really, really like want something that works well. And I'm trying to give the guidance that I can. And I'm being honest, right? It's really technically difficult. And this is a compromise that I've made so far. It's worked well for me, but I'm not giving up on it, right? It's going to take some thought.
The concept of being able to run on multi-simulators at once using something like that has a huge benefit, actually, where you can bring it up and you can test it on all of them at once.
Yeah, and the great thing about that is the REPL is already set up over a specific port. I just have to do the work to let you be able to declare which ports you want to apply it to, and then spawn on multiple instances of the REPL, and then have the PTI process that comes in and intercepts that and sends that all out. So when you do a verbose of a rake file, you can actually see the command that I use to start up the REPL with the port and everything. So there's nothing stopping you from creating your own kind of jerry-rigged implementation. But I just want to test it out enough to where I can say, yeah, this feels good, and then we can get that going.
Okay.
Cool. I like it.
Cool. So yeah, the gist is there. Like really, that's all it is. And I encourage you to hack on it. It's a really, really simple concept. It's just a matter of saying, how can you tailor it to handle the workflows that you have, right? And the good thing with that auto build script is it's run on your machine and not on the device. So the premise is that you have access to all the things that you need. So if you need to set up, like when you touch a file, you need to set up this API call to do this one thing and then do this other thing and then pipe stuff into standard in, do it, right? You have access to all of Ruby on a PC at that point, or on your Macs at that point. Okay, so that's the live reload part. The only other thing I wanted to talk about was I guess the Ruby Dev Summit stuff that I did. Basically talking about like the aesthetics of Ruby and stuff. But you've heard my, I guess, hobby horse with regards to like what I think is a differentiator from RubyMotion. But generally speaking, I feel Ruby as a language, especially with what Matsumoto talked about when he created Ruby, it's this emotion that you get when using it, and I feel Ruby was optimized for developer happiness. And this feel of like incremental growth and never feeling like you've kind of like backed yourself in a corner. At least that's what I felt with Ruby. And that's one of the things that I really emphasize as far as like the Ruby Dev Summit stuff was concerned. And let me show you just a couple of slides of that. Wherever I kept it, where the hell did I keep those slides? I'm totally trying to find it. One sec. F slides. Please find something. Oh, God. All right, f**.org. Oh, I have it somewhere.
Oh,
there it is.
Oh, okay.
I found it. Sorry about that. So real quick, some of the ideas I have with regards to like the aesthetics of mobile development, and the main thing I talked about was with regards to mobile development. You know, I felt a large amount of frustration, right? So primarily mine works with SpriteKit. So this is how you set up a game scene in SpriteKit to get a single square spinning in the middle, right? So you have your SK texture. You have to set it. You still have to set up your app delegate. You have to set up your screen view controller. You have to make the game scene as part of the view control, and then you got to present it, right? So you still have to do all that stuff. And then when you're finally on the screen itself, this is what you have to write out to get it working. So my ideal hello world experience for someone that's doing RubyMotion. Sorry, I'm trying to get this centered. There we go. So my ideal experience is that they make one file, right? No app delegate, no nothing. They make game.rb, and inside of game.rb, they can put this line, right? And if they have a calc loop, they can create the calc loop and expand it this way. And that's what I kind of want to see parts of. Like that's a part of that aesthetic. Part of that is being able to like quickly do a hello world and things like that. This is what I would love to see, right? Is being able to just have a game.rb file and just have it run and not have to worry about all the app delegates and all the nuances of setting up a view controller, and just getting something on the screen and having a display and giving you the ability to play around with it. And so that's like for games. For apps, you know, everyone sees this, right? Everyone knows this spiel. You have the app delegate, the room view controller, or you know, you have a view controller that does this stuff. And I know Blue Potion, Red Potion definitely alleviate some of this frustration. But a part of it is like, well, can it just be one file called app.rb and that's what's in it, right? So no setup. You basically give your view, and you give what happens when someone, you know, calls tap on it. Another idea I had for another premise that I have for business apps, and this goes back to that whole thing about building a wrapped website, right? If you're going for reach and not for monetization, then all your app.rb should probably just be this, right? You have your app ID, your app name, the icon, the website you're wrapping, and then your icon, and then that's it. You do rake deploy, rake default deploy, and you give it your distribution mobile provisioning profile and your distribution key store profile for Android, and it builds the rest and deploys the app for you, right? And those are the kind of, and then there should be obviously an evolution point. You shouldn't be painted into a corner with this approach. But those are the kind of things that I've been thinking about with regards to not just coding apps in Ruby, but bringing the aesthetics of what I feel are the culture and the aesthetics of Ruby to mobile, which is a little different than, you know, just wrapping the classes and things like that. So I'm thinking really, really hard about that and figuring out what that looks like. I have a pilot for that last thing I showed you, where you can do a wrapped website. I have a startup that I'm working with. They're basically dogfooding something that I built out for wrapping website. Hopefully they'll have the iOS version deployed very soon, probably in December, and then the Android version starting in January. But the premise is that they already have a very responsive Rails app. They just need some camera interaction, right, to help them facilitate an upload, get access to the camera, and help them facilitate an upload to their website. And most of it's going to be wrapped web app, and then there's going to be hints inside of the markup that says, this is where I want the upload interaction or upload flow for a photo to be. And then at that point, the RubyMotion framework will take over and then provide just that small little native interaction for them, and then provide a post back to their like Rails controller or their Rails endpoint. So I'm working with the startup to kind of dog food that and kind of pilot this thing. But as far as like the third part, which is like the future RubyMotion, these are the kind of things that I'm thinking about, right? What's the business story for it? Are you going for monetization? Are you going to reach? And then how can I support you to get there? Anyways, that's all I got.
That's
Any
an awesome
thoughts on
I like that a lot.
any thoughts on all that?
Not right now.
Does it feel, I mean, does it feel good? Are you happy in hearing that? Does it feel misguided? Like, I mean, obviously I want your feedback. I want to know what you think about this kind of stuff. And again, I'm taking real world examples, right? I'm taking real world companies. I'm saying, okay, this is the problems they have. How can I help them solve it in a way that merges both the tech and the business acumen of building successful apps together, right?
I think from my standpoint, I like it from the idea that I think it will bring more people into the community. It's a jumping off point, and at the very least, making sure that the community remains alive, thriving, has people. That sort of idea is vitally important.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that taking it to that level is something that I see useful for me.
Yeah, and that's
because I think for me my focus has been that ability to write apps in Ruby sort of idea, right? And recognizing that the deeper that you're going to go into writing an app, the more you're going to interface with in iOS or regular Mac OS Cocoa and stuff like that. You're going to be interfacing with the lower stuff, right? And
yeah, and I want to ease that progression. And what I'm hoping also is that you may have screens that go deep into the bowels of iOS.
Yeah,
but maybe a large portion of your app can just be these like really simple callbacks, and from parts of it you might not have to deal with that, right? So I agree that it's it's more of a jumping off point, but I've seen the end, I guess, right, for a really highly complex app, and now I'm thinking about how could I back into that in such a way that I could have reached that complexity, but over time and not have to learn everything up front. And what I'm hoping is that by doing that, you'll have some screens that will continue to stay as complex as they are, but you might have other screens that can just say, I can delete a lot of this code because I can just do these really simple callbacks that leverage things that are out there. I'm not saying that I'm trying to replace anything. I'll probably use Red Potion. I'll probably use a lot of Bubble Wrap. I'll probably use a lot of Masonry, whatever I can get to get it working. And then just say, like, here's this really, really lightweight thing that basically just inserts a block into an ERB, right? Just a template that gets built during runtime. So it's really, just super simple, nothing complex, right? It's just a templating thing at that point, but I can codify a lot of that.
And I think that makes sense because, I go back to learning Rails originally, and some people complain because Rails is a whole bunch of magic, but that doesn't mean, actually the reason why I do still like Rails is because it's not actually a whole bunch of magic. It's a whole bunch of abstractions that you can learn when you want to learn them, but you don't need to learn them on day one.
Yes.
Right. I mean, if you go back and you watch the Ryan Bates Rails, the podcast on, how your views are found and stuff like that, like where to put your partials, how the partial, something like that, you go back and you understand that, and then it's like, and I can use Rails and construct some very complicated views with common areas and how it parses and things like that. But you don't have to understand that on day one.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that has a lot of benefits. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's true. And the other thing, again, my little hobby horse. The other thing is the business side of it, right? Like, I don't want you to have to deal with that stuff, even at the native realm, if it doesn't make sense for the app that you're building, right?
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I'm trying to really push hard for, is that it's not fun, right? I mean, mobile is fun. It can be fun if you enjoy, if you have a bit of Stockholm syndrome. But generally speaking, it takes like, yeah, you start loving the capture after a while, but you step back and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? So I want to try to protect people as much as possible. Say, like, you may not have to learn all this stuff, and I want you to be conservative on how much you invest in your app, and only invest where it makes sense. And I'm here to help you with that, right? So that's the other component that I believe strongly in, right? I want people to succeed with this, with the platform.
You
All right.
briefly mentioned something that I've been curious about, and that is building things at runtime or at build time. So, like,
Yes.
I think you sort of alluded to creating something that gets transformed during the build process.
Yeah,
I'm
and we
curious
already
if
do
there's-
that.
Is there some hooks or anything available right now? I don't know of any gems or anything that do that sort of thing.
We
during build
basically
time.
just use ERB. So what happens is that we actually have a bootstrapper. The RubyMotion runs a C bootstrapper on your iOS app to actually hook in the runtime, and we just use ERB. So it's just a really super simple template, and then we say, take this Ruby file, and then put your app delegate entry methods into that Ruby file with a very simple template. That's all we're doing. So I think you can get very far with just using ERB from that standpoint.
So you're saying that this functionality already exists for like gem authors to hook into?
It's basically, I'll put something inside of the Slack channel, some reference that you can kind of dig into and get some basically get some inspiration from. But as I flesh this out, there will be things that will get pushed upwards that you'll be able to use also. So it's in the weeds, but there are pieces up there that you may already be able to leverage.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really interested in that.
Yep.
I want to talk about what you were on a podcast the other day. I listened to the podcast.
The Ruby Rogues.
I don't know what it was. It was 69 minutes. That's all I know.
Okay,
like,
I think it was a Ruby Rogue.
Yeah,
if you do 2x speed, it's great.
Yeah. So anyway, you mentioned late in the podcast that about next year, and you were bringing someone on to do something on the Ruby site, and you were also going to be, you have because contractors, I assume, that are still working on the runtime, and that you yourself were going to be working on the runtime along with these people. My question is where does the community fit in to helping that process, or is that going to be a pretty closed process on that end?
So if you look at the RubyMotion applied issues, what I'm starting to do is basically position the code to start opening it up as much as I can. So there's a couple of issues that I'm already putting out there called our RubyMotion internals, and those RubyMotion internals are I'm trying to make it in such a way that a lot of this starts becoming more open. The first high level things that I'm going to do is basically the bridge support API stuff, being able to generate that on the fly for yourself if you want. That'll be the big thing. Then exposing more of the RubyMotion header files, so you have access to that to create form function interfaces. And then the next really, really big thing that's probably going to be opened up will be the REPL itself. So the REPL uses the RubyMotion virtual machine, but the cool thing with the REPL is that it gives you some inner workings on how we hook up into the sockets, how we do our JIT, and some of those really, really, you know, relatively low level stuff. And with the REPL exposed, that's where my, I guess, litmus test will come. Is that, am I seeing actual contributions to the REPL? Are people digging into it, or is it just quote unquote too scary for people, right? Something that I mentioned in the podcast, saying that we got to be able to dig in. As Rubyists in general, you know, we should be able to understand, read Ruby code, right? Ruby, and just forget RubyMotion just in general. So my REPL is going to be my first attempt. Open sourcing the REPL will be the first, I guess, pulse on how much interest there is in seeing more of this stuff.
Right.
But that's basically my plan right now.
Okay. Because I have downloaded Ruby source.
Oh yes, I know.
And,
I see your comments, and I'm like,
I watched a YouTube video. It was kind of cool. It was a 30-minute video, and the guy went through how to navigate through the source and where to look for things.
yeah.
And it was pretty cool. And then I downloaded MacRuby, which, you know, the parts I don't understand about any of it is actually the low-level virtual machine stuff, which is you know, I mean, just looking at the methods and how they're put together is pretty straightforward, but getting down into the really low-level bits on how the virtual machine works is a lot more complex, and not necessarily I can help in any of those areas, because I can't. I mean, I'm not a compiler expert. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of doing the kaleidoscope thing on.
Yeah,
on
the kaleidoscope will really help. It will significantly help understand some of that stuff. So basically, the RubyMotion runtime, a virtual machine, is the kaleidoscope constructs, the Ruby AST parsers, and then the Objective-C runtime merged together.
Right.
So
I guess the part where I'm really not 100% is the bridge support. I've seen so many problems, like today. Did you ever figure out with like Realm? It's a pretty popular database out there, and yet for some reason it doesn't come in.
Yeah, and the reason for that is you actually saw the difference is because the bridge support in the virtual machine and all the bridge support interactions are specifically to Objective-C and not C++. So I'm working towards, so basically what's going to happen with Realm is the same thing that happened with SQLite, is there's going to have to be a few form function interfaces that exposes the C++ APIs that we want. And that Surface API is going to be small, or I'm not going to say it's going to be small, but there's going to be some Objective-C stuff that you'll just be able to use, but the internal C++ stuff, we're going to have to figure that out. And that's something that I am working with Mark on, and making sure we have like a good headway in there, because that's something, if you go to the RubyMotion Applied, there is a thing that says have documentation on Realm. So I want SQLite to be accessible, and I want Realm to be accessible. But anyways, yeah, the first thing will be bridge support for RubyMotion internals. The second thing will be really large copious amount of documentation on how to create form function interfaces, if you are brave enough to do something like that, and it's fun. And then the third thing will be to open source the REPL to see how much interest there is in seeing more of this stuff.
And is that the person you're planning to bring on to do that part of the, is it documentation? I'm not sure what that person you were talking about was going to be.
Oh, that's going to be more of a community manager role. So,
community manager. Sorry, that was the right.
Yeah, so that's going to be more like tutorials, overhauling the entire, documentation just for simple apps.
Okay.
Consolidating what gems are good, what gems need help, all that. That's more of the just being a good RubyMotion user as opposed to being a compiler expert.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's going to start happening next year. Does that kind of answer your question?
Sure.
It's going to be it's incremental, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to just open source everything, but I'm open sourcing the things that are most important.
Right. I want to ask Andrew. I've been looking at this background of yours, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. What is in the background? What have you got there? It looks like is that a curtain or?
Got a big.
Is that like you're doing a video production or something?
You know the episodes of Dexter where he like
yeah, that's it. Yeah. Are you
Like,
planning?
you know,
You got a big,
saran wrap and
let me see the big knife.
No, actually, it's a big drop cloth that I hung up, so you can't see all the junk behind me.
Oh, let's see. You're very okay. Do I have anything? Here, I got blue. Speaking of that, I just want to tell you guys, if you have an old iMac and the video card goes like mine did, and you get little pink bars down the center,
okay.
and then it doesn't boot up anymore. So I said, well, I guess it's screwed. So then I read on the internet, well, if you bake the video card at 400 degrees for 12 minutes, that might fix it. So I did it, and it fixed it. So you are looking at a guy who baked his iMac video card.
That sounds like the April Fool's joke where you can charge your phone by putting it in a microwave for 15 seconds.
It worked. I couldn't believe it. I put it back together and turned it on, and it worked.
I guess the solder points just got loose and
something like
remelted.
that. And it melts it again or something. So
That's
anyway.
interesting.
I can't put, I don't, I hate to say this, but you know, those MacBook Pros are just, I'm on the fence about whether to buy one because I just think they're too expensive.
I freaking love the keyboard. This keyboard, I had the 2013 MacBook Pro, and the butterfly keys on the 2016 are, I'm in love with this stupid ass keyboard. I hate that I love it so much. But yeah, I've been really happy with it. And with the Kaby Lake processors that are out on the 2017s now, I mean, I don't use the touch bar. If you're a Vim user, you use hammer spoon to double up on your caps lock key anyway. So I never use the touch bar. I mean, the function keys at the top. And then anything that I needed, I just use hammer spoon now to code against, which is Objective-C, which is Lua, which is all the other,
right.
dig in, right.
Do you think they're going to admit that maybe the touch bar wasn't a good idea?
Probably not.
No. I wish they'd sell a model that didn't have it and it was a high-end model. And then the price might be a little cheap.
I mean, the interesting thing is that I'd love to see the actual trackpad end up being a screen. That would be really interesting. So it's already glass, it's already haptic, right? It's the power management, I guess, is the real issue. But if they start making the trackpad a screen, that's pencil aware and multi-touch, that becomes very cool. But who knows?
All right.
But I love it. The keyboard alone was worth the upgrade for me, as silly as that sounds. But
you like the new keyboard?
I love it. I love it so much. Do you have the new Mac?
No, I've got a MacBook. I got the the MacBook Nothing, the super light, because for traveling and stuff like this, if you're not sitting in first class, this is the only thing that you can open up, and if the person behind you slams down their seat, it doesn't crush it.
So the butterfly keys are different than the ones that are on there.
Yeah. And I don't hate it. Well, the only thing that I actually hate about the keyboard is they made the left and right arrow keys full height.
Yeah. Who uses that? You're supposed to use HJKL. I'm just kidding.
You're a Vim guy, right?
Yes, I'm a Vim. But yes, the ones on the full blown MacBook have more travel and they're more clickier. They feel much more mechanical.
I don't mind the travel, but I do have keys now. I have the first generation one. I do have some keys that don't always operate properly. Yeah,
and I haven't personally dealt with that issue. I mean, I haven't had an issue so far, and I code the crap on this keyboard, but I really love it. I really do. But if you already have a 2013 MacBook Pro, your performance before was just as good. With the Kaby Lake processors, I think they have faster RAM on there and 20% faster processor too. So,
but the 8th generation, which is the ones that are just come out, I've heard they're 40% faster.
Oh, so I heard 20%, and I like that they're 40% faster.
So the question is, will Apple wait a year, or will they finally bring in line with the rest of the industry and bring them out a little sooner? That's my biggest complaint about them, is that they almost wait a whole year and then they put.
Well, I mean, they're out now, right? The ones that are.
No, actually, they don't normally wait. but it depends on the release cycle and what they're doing.
The Kaby Lake is the 8th generation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're out.
Yeah, the problems that they had, I think, with getting the chips from Intel and stuff like that, and getting the specs, and they, they were doing with the new design, I think, with the touch bar. It used to be that the Mac laptops had the newest iron as soon as it was out, but this is going back 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if Kaby Lake is the 8th generation, then the Macs that are out right now, you can order right now, do have that. So they have the Kaby Lake, and then they have the 2300 or 2333 megahertz RAM as opposed to the 1800. So yeah, I mean, I think if you have a 2013 Mac, I would say it would have been a toss-up with the 2016s. But with the 2070s, I'd probably say that it might be worth upgrading. If you have a 2015 Mac, I'd probably wait. But if you're at a 2013, I think it's time.
I was more interested in the size difference to see. I was using a MacBook Air for a while, like the Air 11, and then I went with the MacBook, which wasn't faster, but it had the better screen and was even lighter. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I bought it because it made my MacBook Air 11 look large, which
So I've spec'd that the MacBook relative to the Air is 33% slower.
Yeah. Now I got the top end processor in it and everything like this, right?
Got it.
For me, actually, the biggest thing is not the processor speed; it's memory, right? If I could have gotten it with 16 gig, I would have gotten it with 16 gig.
Yeah, 8 gigs is, I think, the limit, right?
Yeah. And that more than anything else, I mean, there are some things that are, not so much that I notice it. Now, I'm not running big compiles or anything like that. But I mean, most of the time when you're developing, like in RubyMotion, how many files are you compiling at a time?
Yeah,
right?
It's not a lot. It's not a lot. No.
But I never have had any problems with running Xcode or anything. So, anyways, sorry, we've gone sideways. Andrew, sorry.
Get the Mac. Sorry. Was there anything else that we wanted to talk about? And did you want to show what you were doing, Andrew?
Sure. I was curious, how's Mark doing?
He's doing good.
Anymore.
He's doing good. He's partying hard as usual. He's young. Did you know he's only like 26, 27? Like, man, you're a kid. So yeah, he's enjoying his time in Spain. Hopefully I'll get to fly out there probably early next year, both to see Laurent and him. And hopefully Ruby Kaigi come next year. I'll be able to see Watson too and say hello to him over there. But
cool.
Yep, everyone's doing good.
All right, I'll share my screen. Everybody see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right. So I have been working on building a cross-platform HTTP client for RubyMotion. Getting some ideas. Basically, I've been thinking a lot about the RubyMotion cross-platform story, and we started out with Flow, and it's been okay, but I think it's kind of evolved into something that's not so good anymore. Originally, it started out as sort of a collection of cross-platform libraries, but they got kind of stale, and so I thought about taking a step back and just making one gem that does one thing really well, and that is cross-platform HTTP client that's going to work the same way on iOS as it does on Android. The first challenge that I ran into when I started making this gem is that RubyMotion currently doesn't have a template for creating cross-platform gems. So I had to sort of manually borrow some stuff as I worked through some issues.
Yeah, and in essence, that I'm going to put that on my to-do list. But in essence, basically, the cross-platform gem, the way it would work, it basically copy-pastes files in memory. It's like, okay, we'll take files from the Android directory and then build it with that instead of the iOS one, right? So you'll basically have a shared folder and then an iOS only folder and an Android folder. But that is on my list of things to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's sort of what I have been working on. So here's our libs directory, sort of the main Ruby file that gets required when you specify the gem by its name in your gem file. And this basically determines which files are going to get built when you build your RubyMotion app. First, we include the common directory files into here. So up here I've got Android, Cocoa, and Common. And then down here we check to see which RubyMotion template is currently the one that you're using that's available in your Ruby environment. And if it's Android, we are requiring Motion Gradle. And so this gem here is going to rely on this OK HTTP library. And for iOS and the others, it's going to use AF networking. So the first thing to do here is to define like what kind of API we want. And I started out with just a simple GET request that returns a response object that has your status code, response body, and whether or not it was successful. And to try to make this cross-platform. So started with a Motion HTTP class here. Working through issues, trying to figure out how to get the code to work equally well on iOS and Android.
So
running it into an issue which might not be related to the error I'm seeing over here. I'm getting in Android, I'm getting exception, no method error, undefined method freeze for this array, which made me think it had to do with this, but then I realized that's not actually code that I've written.
So a couple of other things with Android that you have to think about also is the payload size.
Okay.
The actual JSON payload size is going to be a bigger issue. You also need to think about something called multi-dex support. So that comes into the picture when you start reaching the upper limit for all methods that are accessible to your Android app across all packages you reference. So that's another big thing. The other thing that you see is the JNI stuff. And the reason for that again is you have to think about how many functions that you have, I guess, or how many things you have on your stack, basically. And that's when you get into JNI issues. So your code has to be very, very tight with regards to Android. Now, as far as the freeze, I think that's a runtime issue. So if you can just get me like a really simple snippet of freeze not being available, I'll make sure to have that put in. And we're also working on Oreo and Android API or Android 8, right? Oreo, whatever Oreo is. I think that's API 27 or 28. So that if you see something that you would expect to be on a Ruby object that isn't there, that's a missing API that we can add on there. So I wish I could say it'd be better for Android, but there's just these like weird nuances with Android as far as upper limits for stack, upper limits for payload size, and this is across the board. So you may want to do some reading on just Android payloads, right? Or Android HTTP payloads, or Android multi-desks, or Android stack sizes. And I'll give you some pointers on how people, even building native Android apps, have expanded those, and how they've dealt with some of those like really frustrating aspects of the OS itself.
Interesting.
Just a heads up on that. It's just there'll be dragons with regards to HTTP and APIs with a lot of methods.
I'm curious if I've ran into more issues now that I've upgraded to High Sierra, because I feel like I had better success just a week ago when I wasn't on High Sierra.
Okay, and if you give me a reference to the project, I'll take a look at it too. I have both a High Sierra Mac and a regular Sierra Mac, so I can take a look at that and see if I see anything specific there. So yeah, I can definitely do that for you. For some of the HTTP things that you were doing, kind of what's it called, inspired by what was in Flow, or were you thinking of or at least for like the internals, right? Not necessarily the top level APIs, just the internals themselves. You might want to look at Flow's HTTP layer, because that one, the Java one, was working from what I understand.
Yeah, the Java one was having issues last time I tried it.
Okay, I'll take a look at that too.
And the thing is, so
I think it's a good thing to push out.
Yeah, the goal of this was to third-party libraries that are already doing all the heavy lifting.
Yes, that's a good idea.
So this here was just going to be a simple like a unified API on the Ruby side, but then it splits out into different adapters. So like when you end up making a request, it goes to either the Cocoa adapter, which uses the AF HTTP session manager to make the request. For some reason, I was having issues dynamically calling that method.
Yeah,
so I had to explicitly list them out here.
Andrew, on the iOS side, was there a reason why you didn't use NSRL session?
You mean instead of AF networking?
Yeah.
I think AF networking wraps the session management stuff, right? At least version 3.0.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's just that I had written a simple class that did something similar like that, but just wrapping in a Searle session. And it really wasn't all that complex. I mean, I haven't gone very far with it, I'll admit, but you know, removing a dependency is, you know, I mean, at least this way you don't get doubly betrayed sort of idea, because if Apple changes something underneath, then you're dependent on, you know, the AF Motion or the AF networking guys fixing their stuff, and then you have to upgrade to their latest stuff, you know, whereas you could go directly to the Apple stuff. But
one other idea I want to throw out there is that, and this is again something I'm thinking about just long term, is almost saying that I would, quote unquote, not even make the Cocoa wrapper and just use AF networking, and then make the Java API quack like a duck. So you make it quack like AF networking, which is so weird, but I mean, because there'll be like a lot of no-ops and weird stuff there, and I don't know what kind of convergence you would get. But the premise is that you build for iOS first, make sure it works, make sure all the things work, and if you're using the AF networking APIs, the Android APIs will just quack like a duck and work the same way. And that removes, it sacrifices a little bit of your API, right? You don't get the nice idiomatic APIs that you would potentially get with just pure Ruby wrappers. But from the other side of it is that you're not having to write any of the Cocoa side at all. You're just saying use AF networking, and we'll make sure that the Java side just acts the same way. So that's just, again, throwing that out there. That might be an interesting approach to take.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I like the AF networking API, then I'd probably go that route.
Yeah, I know. We've talked about that.
Yeah,
they're not fantastic, but
I'd rather not have to write, you know, a method.
Yes,
like
I
this
know.
And, you know, create all these lambdas in order to do all this stuff, when I could just have a simple HTTP GET. Yeah. So this is what
it's much cleaner.
But
I totally
ultimately, you know, all these dependencies could eventually get replaced with just some simple, you know, platform-specific code. But that's kind of what Flow is right now. It's platform-specific code. So you really have to know the platform-specific details in order to use it. Whereas using a third-party library that's maintained by a lot of people, I could just leverage that, and then if their API ever changes, then that's when it's time to update.
Yep.
So anyway, that was what I was going for here. On Android, it almost seemed a little simpler.
So Andrew, what is the library called again from the Android side?
OK HTTP.
Okay, and that's a Java library, I assume?
Yeah.
And
so
I understand what you're doing. It makes sense to me that you would just leverage that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were a few interesting things I learned about working in Java, Android, right? RubyMotion Android, and that is that you really have to, when you're working in Android Studio and you want to import some class, you can just start typing and
you get the autocompletion.
and it'll autocomplete the imports, and you don't even really notice what's going on up here until you expand your this import section, and then it shows you here's all the things that it imported. But in RubyMotion, you have to explicitly list out all the namespaces that these come from. So that was a little more of a challenge, because you've got the class names end up being a lot longer. But that's just something to keep in mind.
You've seen you're doing it right there, right? On line 4, you did it, so you're aware of the aliasing, the class aliasing that you have there. Oh, sorry, you're not. You can just, I guess, alias the class, right? So you have your constant definition that you have there. You can point that to the actual type.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep. So that's how I alleviate a
Yeah,
lot of the widgets.
in this case, it's a little different. It's making me initialize this
Correct. Right.
an instance of this class in order to use this.
So you could basically just call, you could say set, OK builder equal to this whole request builder madness thing.
Yeah.
So Andrew, the problem you had is you have a crash, obviously in the Java bridge there. It must be in the bridge because the actual library works, right? So when you ran
The library works
because you've probably tested it in Java already. So the question is when you're trying to put it into Ruby, that's where the problem is, obviously, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't crashing like this
Right there.
not that long ago.
What does it say? Oh no, the method freeze. Okay, is there a workaround for that?
I'm not even sure where this array is coming from.
Well,
it's not in my code.
It's not in your code?
I don't have these uppercase strings in an array.
That's a side link error.
So
lib payload.
Oh, but you know what? I think I know what's going on now. What other gems am I using? I've got a gem called WebStub. I bet that's what it is. I introduced WebStubs because I started writing tests. So here's my tests over here. WebStub gives you some helpers to be able to disable network access so that you're not making actual requests. It's letting you know if you're trying to and you haven't stubbed that request yet. But the way that you use this is a little funky because so this block here will execute asynchronously. And so you have to wait for the block to execute. So we're waiting for a second. And then the block says resume in order to resume the request. And then we're checking that the stub was requested. This is kind of annoying, but I wanted to try getting these tests passing on both iOS and Android using just the same test. So that I know that the API is the same across both platforms, but they're implemented and working the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, what we ended up doing in Flow, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is just we have that really lightweight Sinatra server that starts up before we kick off the test.
Yep.
And it's just one of those things where it's like you can stub it out, but you just got to be careful with it. And yeah, you come into some of these asynchronous issues too. So and just be aware of that. Another thing that we've tried, that I've tried in the past, is actually having for my iOS stuff, having an HTTP server on the device. So actually having an HTTP server run on the device, and then having the HTTP API call the HTTP server on the device. And I would be surprised if there's not a Java or Android equivalent of spinning up an HTTP server on your device. If that's not available, I'd be surprised. So that's another thing that you might want to try to play around with and see if you can get something working there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Another thing I was dealing with is the testing library for RubyMotion is called Bacon, which is a fork or a clone of some other library called Bacon, which is sort of a plain, sort of a simple Ruby clone of RSpec.
Yep.
So it doesn't have all of the nice RSpec features, and there's some strange things in here like wait max, and the assertion syntax here is a little different.
Yeah, it doesn't use the RSpec 3 assertion syntax. It uses the Fluent assertions.
Right.
Yep.
And so I was thinking, how do I get access to make updates to Bacon, the test framework that we use in RubyMotion? And then I was thinking, well, if I make updates, how is that going to affect other RubyMotion developers? Because it's sort of bundled in by default. It's not a gem that we specify. So then I was wondering, should it get moved out into a gem that we can maintain together?
I think that's a good idea. I think that's one thing. As a first cut, Bacon does allow you to have like custom assertions, create your own assertions. So you might want to at least start with that, and maybe it ends up being like an assertion suite as opposed to changing Mac Bacon itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give you a sample of like how I've done assertions also. But basically, you just provide a Lambda. You create a module, or you basically say, add this assertion with this, like should have 10 requests, let's say, is your assertion name, and it can do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's strictly just the assertions themselves and you want some more, there's a means for you to do that very easily. Now, if it's like actually the nested, describe it, specify the actual like call chains that will require an update to Bacon. But if it's just assertions, we can do that without updating Bacon.
Yeah, I think that
makes sense.
Closer parity to.
Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say that it'd be nice to have closer parity to RSpec, like especially using the expect syntax. I'm so used to.
Well, the RSpec matchers are in a separate gem.
Yeah, and you might be able to pull in some of those RSpec matchers and just kind of include it. I'll get you an example though, real quick. I'll put it in the Slack channel.
But yeah, putting a gem up that had those sorts of matchers are handy for those of us that are really vested in the RSpec syntax.
Yeah, I love RSpec too.
And I am.
Yeah. Well,
I like the expect syntax too. It's not horrible.
I'm not sure if Bacon supports these let.
The lets? No, I don't think it does.
I use these so much. I have to rethink how I write a test because I feel limited in some ways. That I'm always referring back to Jamin's Bacon cheat sheet in order to remember how to use Bacon syntax in order to write tests. But anyway, it just got me thinking about how do we maintain it and keep moving it forward and that sort of thing.
Sounds good.
But the idea of having those out in a separate library, I would really strongly second that, because that way people, as long as the underlying syntax isn't a problem, where Bacon changes like with Ruby, then people could solidify on one, and then they wouldn't have to rewrite all their tests with a new version and stuff like that, hopefully.
Yeah.
So the other thing I worked on or was running into is how do I, as a gem author here, first of all, run my test suite in both iOS and Android, and start up or do any of the platform-specific stuff. And I learned from the way that the Flow project was doing it is in our rake file, we default to iOS template. That's fine. But ultimately what's going to happen is that we're going to run this rake file again, passing in the template that we want to use. So if right now, if I just say bundle exec rake-t, why isn't it typing? Sometimes the Android REPL gets my shell kind of messed up.
Maybe you need to put it in the oven.
Maybe.
I still can't believe that worked.
It worked. I'm telling you. I didn't think it would. I didn't think I could get it back together. Never mind. It's gonna work. It's always good that you don't have any parts left.
Yeah, yeah.
So the running bundle exec rake-t, we can see some of the default rake tasks that we get. So the gem tasks here we get from requiring the gem template, gem tasks. But in order to get our Android specific tasks, what we do is we have a Android namespace down here, and we copy out the tasks that we want, and then we invoke rake, passing the template and the tasks that we want to run. So this invoke rake calls system, specifying the template that we want, calling rake again with the task. So in this case, if I run bundle exec rake android spec, what's happening is it's invoking bundle exec rake spec, but since we're specifying the template here as an environment variable, that sets our template up here as Android. And then when that template gets set and this file is being required again, we get to this part here where we are checking if we're using the Android template, do some Android specific setup here, remove the Cocoa files from the app directory.
Exactly. Yep.
And so we're doing a little bit of I don't know what you call it, recursion in this case, where we're starting out in this rake file, and then we're calling system and specifying template, and we're calling this file again in order to.
Yes. Yeah, and these are the situations where that like auto build paradigm can help, right? You can have two PTY tasks that get spawned off at the same time that shell to the standard and bring it back out. But yeah, these are the things. These are the same ancillary things that I'm exploring too. So another option you have, and again I'll point you through some of the templating stuff that we have in there, is that these rake files just call into the Motion lib directory. So you could new up a builder, right? You can new up an Android builder, and you can new up an Xcode project builder, and just use those directly as opposed to using the rake tasks too.
Interesting.
So I'll point you to those things, just again for inspiration, and I'll have more samples out there as I flesh out this work that I'm doing with the startup.
Cool. Yeah, let's see. Can run iOS spec. I think I commented that one out. So I also started seeing these issues with these gems ever since I upgraded to High Sierra.
Are you using RVM?
I'm using RBEnv. Okay,
so you are using RBEnv. Okay. Because there were some issues. We were seeing those warnings with RVM. But I wasn't seeing it on my High Sierra clean install. So a couple of things you might want to try: just deleting Ruby build and RBM altogether, and then just letting that reinstall and recompile against 10.13. That might fix those issues.
Interesting. Yeah, because I tried running this command by itself, the gem pristine, but that didn't fix it.
Yeah, it might be the rubies itself that's needs to be essentially recompiled on 10.13. So I would just try to remove that altogether and then reapply it.
So here we've got our test output running on iOS. And we've got a bunch of passing tests. And then we get to a failed test. And the output is a little hard to understand. But anyway, that's what we had to work with. Saying that this stub wasn't requested. If we run Android, actually, here's some examples that should all work if I think what I figured out was that the problem is WebStub isn't compatible with Android yet.
Okay.
So if I comment this out, try running this on Break Android, which will boot up the emulator. So another thing I had to figure out in this process was how to get my Android environment up and running, which
Genymotion is your friend.
Yeah, well, there's more to it than that that I ran into anyway. Around like SDKs and NDK, and the RubyMotion installer for that, it didn't seem like it was compatible anymore with the way it works.
Okay, I'll double check that.
And I already had Android Studio up and running, and I had stuff. For work, I do some work on Android, on an Android app in Java, but so I already had some SDKs and NDKs installed, and just wanted to get it working correctly for RubyMotion. So I was able to set the RubyMotion Android SDK and NDK paths to point to the locations in Android Studio. And let's see if our emulator was running, but I think it crashed. But it did start making some of these requests when it loaded up our main activity. Whoops, wrong one. Main activity boots up this and makes these requests here. Try just making a few of these. I'm going to try commenting it out all together.
So the reason I guess push Genymotion so much is that the Android Studio emulators are horribly slow. Well, I guess depending on which emulator you pick up, but they're bad. They're slow. I don't know if that's something that you've experienced also, or is it just me? But generally speaking, I've seen them being pretty damn slow.
Yeah, Genymotion is generally faster.
Okay.
But in this case, actually, I think I tried. At one point, I was successfully using Genymotion with RubyMotion.
Okay.
But in this case, I think it was not working correctly because I changed the location of the NDKs.
Okay. Yeah, you have to. There's an option in Genymotion, I guess, repoint those also. But I'm trying to. I've contacted Genymotion with regards to like affiliate or collaboration between RubyMotion and Genymotion, basically providing like a really good experience for the two together.
Mm-hmm.
So they were excited about it. It's not going to the main work for I guess the new Android experience won't start until Q1 of 2018, but which is not far away. But just a heads up that I am pushing for a good affiliate / collaboration with them.
Nice.
So hopefully,
Okay.
when you do the starter edition of RubyMotion, if all goes well, you will also get a quote unquote personal license of Genymotion automatically.
Oh.
So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I would like
I've
to.
also got a test device that I use, which works well.
Yeah, we tried to use Genymotion a couple times, and we never were able to get it to work. But it wasn't a high priority, so I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like once I get it wired, I'll work with them to get all the bits and pieces that I need to wire correctly. Make sure all. I have a CLI tool. Ideally, it'd be great if you can just do brew install RubyMotion and brew install Genymotion and just show up. But long road to that. At least from the Genymotion side, I'm going to push for that for RubyMotion. But that's part of it, right? To set it up to where all the configs are in the right place, so you don't have to worry about trying to muck with any of that.
Well, for whatever reason, doesn't like.
It's probably because you have the simulator started up right now. Are you trying to deploy to your device?
No, I was trying to deploy to the
simulator. So,
okay. So we could see it running, but
I can get my Android simulator up in 20 seconds. Is that considered long?
I would say yes.
That's long?
I don't know. I think.
Oh, I thought it was pretty good myself.
Sounds fast to me. The iOS simulator seems about as slow as that.
I have my own little command here. Just say start emulator. It just starts my emulator.
Well, anyway, I don't know why this is.
Now I'm gonna have to time mine.
The other thing I realized is that it didn't. Android didn't like the iOS resources, or the resources directory here for. It assumed it was going to have some Android resources in it, and when it found this
got it
PNG file, it complained. So I had to rename it just to get Android to boot up. But that's about it for my show and tell. Does anybody have any questions about?
And this repo is online right now?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Still in private development.
No, that's fine. And we can like DM and talk to each other. If you hit any of those snags on the Android side, just let me know. And if anything, I can add a minimum triage and say this is runtime related or it's multi-dex related. I felt a lot of these pains already, so I might be able to help you out on those.
Yeah.
It's not fun. I think, once you get over, I think some of the initial humps with understanding the JNI and the limitations, the OS limitations that you have, and then you've tweaked the right configurations in your application manifest to open some of those things up. I think at that point you'll be good. But just trying to fine tune and find out the right numbers for each one of the specific devices you're trying to target is not fun. But we can get them. Get there.
Just walking through this example has just highlighted a lot of different things that could be improved and areas to work on.
Yep. So I'm getting the release, RubyMotion 5.5. It's got a few more bridge support API fixes for iOS. But I think the only other thing that's left is 11.2. So as soon as that comes out, I think Apple Christmas is finally done, and they'll close down shop for the holiday season. We'll get the RM guys, the RubyMotion guys, will get a chance to breathe, and then we'll set up the high level milestones for next year. Primarily, it's going to be around documentation, exposing more RubyMotion internals, and then Android Oreo is the big thing. First 64-bit only OS that's compiled against the new CLang and all that good stuff too. So that's gonna be fun to. It'll be good. I'll be happy to see more of 32-bit deprecation happening. But that's coming up. That'll be the plan for November and December, and then all the quote unquote marketing pushes and the news, the press release, and all that other stuff. So, brave new world.
Yeah.
I am curious to hear if anybody has any projects going on, anything they're working on where they're running into anything they need help with, or anything else anybody else would like to share.
Is Lori here?
I don't see her.
No, I don't see her.
No, Lori didn't join.
RubyConf. There's going to be a not a talk on RubyMotion, but there's going to be a talk on Ruby outside of just web. So it's going to be a game development topic. I'm not giving it, but there will be a talk over there. And I am going to RubyConf. So if you find yourself in New Orleans, come say hello and all that good stuff.
Well, that's about it. Off topic, I'd like to ask somebody if they've ever looked at Crystal.
Yes.
What did you think?
It's interesting. I would find it more interesting if they managed to get a compiler running on Microsoft as well. But right now it's all Linux, because the aspect of being able to write up some sort of a command line utility or something like that and doing it in Ruby and so forth looks really appealing. I had heard that they actually had a web server running.
Yeah, it's called, they have a bunch of web server. One's called Amber. I mean, that's a framework, sorry. They have a framework called Amber. And I've seen some of the the performance, some of the performance on it is incredible. So
well, it's compiled code, right?
Right. And it's what interested me was LLVM.
Yep, they're pushing for LLVM on that too.
And that was just interesting. That's all. It was just like so they decided to go that way. But they're trying not to say they're Ruby though. They're trying to say we're Ruby inspired, but they're not trying to be compatible.
And there's a real big conversions for LLVM as a compiler tool chain lately. So I mean, even with WebAssembly, it's good. Like if you're gonna make a language, LLVM is something that you definitely want to not ignore. So really, really cool stuff.
Have you heard whether Android's thinking of doing it?
I'm sorry?
Android doesn't go LLVM, right?
They're not, but there's a Kotlin
right
LLVM. So they, it's like going the opposite direction. So hopefully they learn enough from that side and it's like, hey, this is awesome. We should totally. But they just finished art not too long ago, only a couple of years ago, or well, I guess it's been three years now. So it's like, hey Google, yeah, art's great and all, but how about you rewrite your NDK and everything in LLVM and get back to us as quickly as you can. I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I guess I wouldn't hold my breath. Is the long and the short of it.
One last question for you, Amir. You mentioned in the podcast that to monetize iOS is the way to go, and you didn't seem to be too thrilled about Android, even though you say you had 300,000 downloads of the darkroom. Are you saying that the people? I know it's generally, but that hasn't changed. That people still aren't purchasing on Android like they do on iOS. Is that what you're saying?
They're just not. Yeah,
Okay.
they're just not. Primarily because you look at 300,000 on Android. I'm at 3.1 million on iOS, right? So just the sheer number.
But you had a head start on you.
I did. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I do have a head start, but I hit the number 2 spot on the Android App Store or the Android Google Play Store, right? And at the number 2 spot, at premium downloads, I clocked in at about like 628 downloads. And then on iOS, that was about 15,000, right? So
at the same levels, you mean at the same 300,000 level before?
Like it's like the ranks are just the order of magnitude of monetization potential is there. There's a game publisher called Tiny Touch. They did Card Crawl and Card Thief, and they're really open about the numbers that they have with regards to Android and iOS. For iOS, their latest application, they ended up making it premium on iOS and then free on Android. And I think their monetization numbers were like on iOS, they're selling it as a premium app anywhere from like $1.99 to $2.99. On Android, they're making 4 cents a download as a free app through ads and whatnot, through rewarded ads and everything. So there's a lot of examples of this, right?
So it's not changing. It's my question, I guess, is over the years, you're not seeing a change in the type of user in Android versus the iOS. The Android guys are cheap.
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was more direct way to say it, but yeah, I think that and the Google editorial teams, the Android editorial teams, they're generally pushing for ads and rewarded ads.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like you're not going to support premium, and then you want me to put ads in my application, and then you have vendor fragmentation, and then you have device fragmentation, and you have OS limitations, and you're trying me to do all this stuff, and then at the end of it, your revenue is a fraction of what I can get on iOS. So from strictly a monetization, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mentioned that like if you're going to do foreign, if you're going to target foreign countries, there's an opportunity there. South Korea and Japan have very high-end Android devices, and they're willing to pay for stuff. The problem is that from a monetization standpoint, you have to understand their cultures too, right? Mm-hmm. Culturally, you have to be in line with what they find valuable. So like a number one app, like a really, really well performing app in Japan was a tap energy app where you're a girl dating a horse that has the head of a prince, like a human. So if you look for horse prince and you download this app has apparently made like $1 million in revenue. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, just Google horse prince app and you'll see the cultural madness there is. So there's revenue potential there, but you have to understand, what is considered a valuable app over there.
Right.
So if you're going to do Android in international markets, there is an opportunity there. It's tricky, right? I just don't have experience there. Reach, definitely, right?
The Android market, the apps have to be free, and you have to be looking at micropayments, don't you?
So that's the thing. So there's an app out there called Badlands. I don't know if you've seen it. So Badlands 1 and Badlands 2, they actually did premium on iOS, and they did free with IAP on Android. And the way they would encourage people to convert to IAP and ads, and the way they would try to encourage Android users to convert over to a premium experience is they would put like fewer checkpoints between deaths. So your deaths were more punishing, which was supposed to try to encourage, and then you get the ad, right? So it's like they want to encourage you to go to the premium experience. What they found was that just their engagement just dropped. So they were just losing revenue. So they're like, okay, we're just going to put the checkpoints back in. So even if they're trying to either negatively or albeit negatively incentivize them to just go for the premium experience, they still wouldn't do it. So that's something that happened with Badlands. Alto's Adventure, similar story there. Premium on iOS, free on Android. But it's getting to the point where like Monument Valley didn't even go to Android. They're just like, screw it, we're just not going to do it. So you have The Witness, you have like games like Binding of Isaac, the Monument Valley series. All these games are just saying we're just not going to deal with it.
Well, Monument Valley, I guess the marketing focus is I mean, like it's you know, the development of the game, it's the look of the game, it appeals to a high end, shall we say? And
yeah, but Monument Valley 1
that's not the Android. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Monument Valley 1 was on Android though.
They both are. I just finished the second one yesterday.
Okay, so Monument Valley 2 is on Android now?
Yeah, it just came out a couple months late.
Okay. So I mean, so that's good. That's good. I'll have to contact them and say how to go. But I'd be interested in hearing what they say about their revenue potential. But they've also published their revenue for Monument Valley 1. And I think a good 80% plus of revenue came from iOS. So I am surprised that they went to Android, but I'll reach out to them and ask them how it's going. So I'm not immediately dismissing it, but yeah, it's really tough to monetize. I wish it wasn't, but it's tough to monetize and it's a pain to work with all the.
Well, some of the things I was hearing one guy talking, the things that you do monetize on Android, I think, are the utilities.
Yeah, premium. I think like premium productivity apps, hyper niche premium productivity apps. I can totally see that.
But like guys building launchers and stuff like that, which, you know, is not a market on iOS. That's one of the areas where people will pay for that sort of thing. You know, they don't buy as much. They may only buy 6-7 apps total on an Android. You know, and it depends on the user because there's such a wide range of users. I mean, when they're buying high-end Note 8s and stuff like this, that's a different user than, you know, the guy buying the $75 phone, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and if I had a better number on like how many people actually have the Pixel 2 or the Samsung Galaxy S8 Edge, you know, like the really, really high-end devices, you know, that would be a more realistic picture of the people that are willing to spend, right? And what that number looks like relative to the number of iPhones out there, like how many iDevices relative to that. And then what's their upgrade percentages, right? How many of them are already on Oreo or how many of them are still on Lollipop, right? Those kind of things would be really good information to know. It's just, I don't know why it's not there.
All right.
All right.
Hey, Dan, I'm curious to hear if you have done any Apple TV work recently. Any updates that you had to make for your app?
I just had to import the 4K assets, but I don't even have a 4K Apple TV yet, so I can't really do much with it.
Yeah, I get mine in December. December 10th is when mine's supposed to ship.
Nice. Waiting for my boss to plop down the dough. So, yeah, just that and bug fixes. Nothing really crazy, but I have been working on it lately.
All right, guys, I gotta go.
Yep. It's 11 o'clock over here. I think I'm about to head out. 2.
Well, one thing real quick. I was working on trying to get Apple Music on Apple TV, and that didn't go very well. They were advertising that you could do it, and you can contact their API, but you can't really have the same experience as you have on the phone, where you can play full-length tracks and things like that. The missing piece is the class, I forgot what it's called, MP Music Player or something like that. Just doesn't work on Apple TV. So pretty disappointing.
Wow.
We were trying to do a lot of stuff with that. So anyway,
I guess I'm sorry. I mean, I think I imagine they're gonna push that more as the 4K stuff gets into play, but it'll be cool to see what happens, I guess.
yep. Someday.
Someday.
We got previews still, so.
Mhm.
All right, well, thanks for joining us.
And that's a wrap, huh?
Talk to you guys next month.
All right, see y'all.
Next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Take it easy.
Bye.